what it takes. It's about changing funder mindsets and practices, and also enabling non-profits to raise funding in a way which is more aligned to achieving the long-term impact that everyone so desires in the sector. I have with me Ravi.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I am Ravi, and I'm a part of an organization called Aria CFO Services. I founded this in 2011, and we have been working with nonprofits since then. About 300 nonprofits that we've worked with on especially helping them manage financials, financial management, putting structures in place, putting SOPs in place to be able to manage financial compliances, SCRA, CSR, and all those things. And I think we come together today, like Shashank said, to talk to you about computing your true costs and then being able to communicate it. Shashank, you would like to start? Yes.
So Ravi asked me to ask this question. So just a show of hands if there's a funder in the room. Good. Because then we can talk very candidly, we can talk about all the challenges that we face, what's really happening in the sector. When the funder is in their room, then we have to be a little more polished, a little more worried about what impression will we make and whether that will affect our funding. So I think about Pay What It Takes, it's a collaborative initiative. There are 7 funder anchor partners, 6 of them are named in the previous slide. There are 200 plus stakeholders that we have interacted with in the last 3 years, 450 stakeholders surveyed. Aria, Dhwani sitting here, there are a lot other intermediaries, NGOs and funders who are championing this cause now. The idea is to have 5 principles embedded in the funder-NGO relationship. The first one is having multi-year funder-NGO partnerships. Partnerships is critical. It's not about just funding. It's about having an approach of funders and NGOs seeing each other as partners. The second is paying a fair share of core cost. And bear with me, there will be a lot of cost related terms that you will get to hear in this session. But what we are calling, what is typically called indirect cost, administrative expenses, overheads, we believe there's a need to change that nomenclature. There's a need to understand how important those costs are. And hence we are calling those kind of costs core cost. Investing in non-profit organizational development. So again, something which has been neglected. If you're all from non-profits, you would have faced it so many times where you want to invest in your people, you want to invest in your organization, but paisa kahan hai? So without money, how would you invest it? Building financial resilience. Our research shows that non-profits have a very day-to-day existence or a year-to-year existence. There's very limited reserves that most of the non-profits have, and they're very dependent on ensuring that there's a continuous cycle of fundraising that's happening. So how do you in a way risk proof the impact that you're trying to create? How do you risk proof your programs if you do not have reserves? So the fourth principle that we talk about is building financial resilience of nonprofits, and the fifth one is to embed a diversity equity lens in grant making as well, because again the research shows that nonprofits which are in urban areas, non-profits which are led by non-Dalit, Bahujan and Adivasi community leaders, they are better off than the other ones. So if you are probably located in a Patna or some city in Jharkhand, then the likelihood of you being distressed is far more than if you are in Mumbai or Delhi. So there is some kind of disparity that is there in the sector, and we believe funders should actively work towards changing that. We are creating a range of resources for non-profits and funders. This is a list. There are reports on funder and non-profit insights. We have conducted research. We have conducted research on what funders think, what are the barriers, etc. There's an OD planning and assessment guide that we have created in partnership with 5 other intermediaries, including Dhwani, Dasra, Satwa, Samhita, Toolbox, and Bridgespan. Uh, there's a compendium of effective grant making practices, because a lot of time when we talk to funders, they say, but this is how it is done in the sector. So there are examples, case studies that we are putting out of funders who are doing it in the right manner. And those are again evidences, again case studies that can be shared with funders who say, but this is how CSR works, or this is how the good funders are doing it. So we want to try and take away any kind of resistance to this kind of change. So we are providing the right kind of like data, evidence, proof for non-profits to have these kind of conversations. Today we are talking about true cost computation and communication guide. And one thing which is also on the anvil is a directory, an online directory of service providers, so that if you are trying to see where can you get an expertise to support you, you are able to access that. There's around I think 90 service providers that we would be listing, all catering to non-profits. Yeah. So so the first question is, why should I be bothering about true cost? And I'll not talk about what true cost is, because that's Ravi's area. I am not an accountant. I'm not really good at finance. Uh, if you are supporting true cost of NGO, there is evidence. Wow. Uh, was it better earlier, my voice, or is it better now?
Now,
Okay. So one of the things that we have heard from funders a lot of time is, why should I invest in organization development? Why should I cover true cost? Why should I cover indirect costs? It's not efficient if I'm covering indirect costs. There is very clear evidence that if non-profits have the money to invest in their organization, if non-profits are getting a true cost coverage, they are able to perform better. Our own research shows that if NGOs were investing in organization development consistently, their budget growth rate was twice as compared to those who were not investing in organization development. Atma's research shows that NGOs which went through Atma's capacity building program for 1.5 year, they were able to reach out to 4x number of people than before. So there is very clear evidence in the sector in India and globally to say that if you're funding true cost, it is going to be beneficial for the community that you want to serve. But challenges are there. In our research, what came out was 83% of NGOs find it challenging to recover core costs from their funders. It's very difficult to go to a funder, say, my indirect costs are 15%, can you cover those? Most of the funders will put an artificial limit to it, and hence there's challenge in recovering those costs. Only 18% of NGOs said that they were investing adequately in organizational development. Everyone felt that there was so much more that could have been done, but they were not able to do it because there was no funding. And 54% of NGOs, and this is September 2020, had less than 3 months of reserves, which is considered to be financially stressed or financially vulnerable situation. What's happening is, and the reason why we are embarking on this journey, why we are talking about these aspects, is when we had engagement with funders, two things came out very clearly. One thing was that funders said NGOs themselves are not clear about their cost. NGOs themselves are not clear about what organizational development areas do they want to focus on. So 75% of funders believe that they will fund organizational development. They have funded organizational development is something that they are saying. But at the same time, only 23% felt that NGOs had shared accurate cost structures in OD needs with them. So there was a communication gap that the funders perceived, and that led to a level of mistrust between the funders and the NGOs, which was creating this situation where even, let's say, if let's say out of these 75%, 50% are genuinely funding NGO OD. But if they don't trust the NGO's judgment of what the cost is, if they don't trust the judgment of an NGO's assessment of what organizational development needs NGO has, they would uh, probably give some feedback I'm getting. Uh, they would sorry, I lost my thought. They'll not fund OD basically. So there's a need for NGOs to present their true cost in a standardized and a logical manner. It's important for an NGO to be able to move away from a situation of going to a funder saying, okay, give me your budget template and I'll fill it up and I'll give it to you. If your budget template says 10% indirect cost, my indirect cost will be 9%, guarantee. That's how a lot of NGOs do operate. So we need to move away from that to say, okay, your policies may be allowing only 10%. We have an indirect cost which is probably 18%. Let's discuss how this can be matched. How can, like, what fitment can be done between your policies and our needs? Because otherwise, you're creating a structure, you're creating a funding situation where the more funding I raise, the more likelihood of me failing as an NGO is, because I'm creating that gap. So there's that need that exists, and that's where this true cost guideline come into picture. And Ravi, how
Yes, so thanks Shashank for the insightful numbers and sort of research on what is happening in the sector, right? What are funders thinking? What are NGOs saying? How many of you here are from the leadership team in organizations in a non-profit? When I say leadership, I mean CEO or CFO or heading fundraising, etc. So, okay. And how many of you are from either the finance or the fundraising team? Yeah, quite a few of you. So all of you know how important this problem is, or how crucial this is, right? Because without this, your organization, your programs, everything sort of really comes to standstill. And so the question is, how do you effectively fundraise? The first thing that we realize that when you do want to fundraise is to come to an understanding of what is your actual cost of being able to do this. Today, when we engage with organizations, the first question we ask is, do you know what your actual support cost or indirect cost is? And often we find that from the leadership to the fundraising, to the finance, to the program, everybody has a different number. Why is that so? Could be multiple reasons. The first and foremost being, what you think of as support cost, somebody else may think of as actually a program cost. How the statute defines something as core cost, how you define something as core cost is very different. Another big challenge is, your chartered accountants or your consultants, how they see core costs and how you see core costs are very different. So that's how Shashank and Bridgespan and Aria got together, and we said, we know the finance landscape very well, and you guys have been doing a lot of research on the fundraising side and how do you really help organizations fundraise. So which is what we're trying to do. We're creating a guideline that will help nonprofits actually compute their true cost, right? I'm assuming every one of you here creates an annual budget and then sort of from there creates what is your fundraising plan, etc. So when it comes to true cost, we have designed a framework, and it says your true cost for any nonprofit is your program cost plus your support cost plus contingency and reserves. So often if I ask you the question, what is your true cost? Organizations stop at program plus support, right? But why shouldn't contingency and reserves also not be a part of true cost? Because eventually this is something that will help you when there is a short-term emergency, when you talk about contingencies, and when there is a long-term situation. There could be an economic downturn, could be a situation where the sector has taken a bad hit, and any of those things. So what we have essentially done is in the guidelines, broken these down into smaller pieces, like, what is program, what really counts as program cost, how do you define and take each cost and sort of put it into that. Now, in a 1 hour masterclass, this is actually not possible to take you through everything. So we have tried and concised it into as smaller bits as possible. We actually do sort of like a 1 day workshop. We have done 3 so far to be able to take organizations through this.
Free workshop.
Yes, free workshop for now. um, yeah, and then again, imagine a scenario where if all nonprofits were talking the same language and saying, this is how we, separate co-costs and this is how we separate program costs. And if everybody was going to every funder in the same manner, the funders would have no choice but to listen, right? So while there is effort which is happening on the funder side, there is an immense amount of effort needed on the nonprofit side for everybody to speak the same language. There are 3 forms of registration. There's a trust, there's a society, there's a Companies Act. Each one has a different reporting standard. How do you pick up a financial statement and compare yourself to anybody, right? Even in that, each chartered accountant or each firm that you're working with will have a different way of reporting, right? And the first thing any funder asks is, please give me three years of audited financial statements, 3 years of tax returns. But what do they really get out of it? Is it just a tick mark, or is it really something that they look at and say, oh, I can actually understand what your program cost is, what your fundraising cost is from the financial statements? That almost always never happens. So how do you compute your true cost? We have, I have, for the purpose of this masterclass, broken it down into like 6 stages. The first one being like an annual plan. What I have parallelly on the right on your right side is basically like what an Excel sheet would look like if you were to compute your true cost. So when it comes to an annual work plan, you will first put down all your all your program costs sort of in columns, and your support costs in terms of headings in columns. You will then one by one list down all your activities and what you want to actually spend for the financial year. And put them down in terms of the natural heads like professional fees and food, stay, when you rent, etc., etc. Once you have this list, you have to then move to the next stage, which is allocations. Each of these costs would be relevant or directly or shared between a program or a support cost or across, right? A simple example is rent, or the CEO's cost, or the leadership team, or things which are not directly related to programs. You would have to spend effort in understanding. So in my example, if you see, I have professional fees here, which is actually shared. So what is the allocation method you use to apportion it between costs, between heads? That's something we have detailed out in the guideline as well, right? What are the methods you can use? What are how do you document it? How do you make use of it when you are fundraising? And things like that. This will give you another set of this will be the second stage where you actually then know that, okay, I have all these costs, but this is how they sort of get apportioned directly or get shared between all the other headings that you have. Again, this is a very small example. When you do this for your organization, you will find yourself having at least 200 line items in some cases, right? So this is not a simple exercise. This, it may look simple, it may look complex, but it does require a lot of time and effort. It is not a one person or a one team job. It requires people across the organization to collaborate and come together and be able to do this. The next stage is sort of summarizing. So once you have put all your costs down and once you have allocated them to the appropriate heads, you have to come up with basically like a summation in your Excel sheet, which will say, what does your program cost look like? What does your support cost look like? So here, let's say our organization budget is 3.2 crores. And then you will also come up with ratios. What are these ratios? So when you have costs which you have no idea, how do you apportion them across the organization. We have defined a term called program expense ratio. So what you will do is you will take, the totals of these three. For our example, we have three programs. You may have 1, 2, 3, 5. You will take the sort of the summation of that and arrive at a ratio, which will tell you how you can, some costs, which you don't have a method of apportioning, how you can push them across the cost. Example, let's say you have hired some service, but there is no definitive way for you to say, how much is used for program 1, for program 2, program 3, and so on. You would look at the effort in the first place, but let's say that is not possible. Is there any other ratio possible? No. The last and the most easiest way to then do it is look at the cost for the whole program. That okay, if program 1 costs me this, program 2 costs me this, the ratio between the two is, let's say, 60-40. I will distribute that cost between these two programs as 60-40. Right? Because you will assume that, okay, if this is the effort and the cost going into this, let's also assume that this particular service can be absorbed between the two in this manner, provided it is also being used by the two. The stage 4 being absorption. Now, one of the key concepts or one of the key struggles everybody has is that how do we raise for support costs when all of it actually does, when it's separate from the program cost? How do you absorb it back into the program cost? So again, we have methods and sort of ratios defined that you can use. So remember the program cost ratio that we spoke about. Now, when you look at fundraising as a whole, it is almost always impossible to say how you can have fundraising cost absorbed by each program, in a time ratio or in some other ratio. So in those cases, you will use the program ratio that we spoke about earlier and distribute it between programs. Like, okay, my education program is 40% of my budget. So my fundraising effort would ideally also be 40% for that, right? And that is how you will absorb your support costs in a very simple manner here to be able to come at what the total cost of that program is. Similarly, like fundraising, you will have admin, you will have communication and outreach, and so on. Like some may have IT costs and HR costs, etc., that you club into administration as well. Once you have the stage 5, that is what you will calculate your contingencies on and your reserves on. What is contingency? Now, often these terms are used interchangeably, but we have very specifically defined that contingencies are for short term. These are ideally situations where, based on your program and based on your experience with or the life cycle of your organization, this ratio will also vary. Oftentimes people will say, what's a good percentage of contingency to have? There is no good percentage, or there is no thumb rule. It is based on what you need. If you are running an organization which is very new, right, and you have pilot programs, the chances are you need a higher contingency because what you don't know is what you don't know. If you are running, an organization or a program which has evolved over the time and is settled very well, the chances are the contingency requirements may be very, very low. This is something you can very easily see by looking at your past trends and saying, okay, we budgeted X, did we actually end up overspending, underspending? What's the cushion that we really need? Being transparent and truthful about this in your pitches, in your budgeting, will go a long way in helping the donor understand. The first year they may say, oh, no, you don't want contingency, or we cannot fund contingency. But consistently, if you keep asking for it and keep showing them that, look, last year this is what happened, and hence we are asking for this, the chances that you'll be able to raise for that keep on increasing. Try this with your existing funders first before you can try it with new funders, because there the relationship takes time to build. The trust will take more time to build. People who trust you will fund contingency and reserves faster, right? Because they already know how you function, how efficient you are. If you are saying something, you are saying it because you have the experience. We have that trust going on between each other. Sorry? Sorry, I cannot hear you. No, no, continue. Not the admin cost. You cannot talk about admin cost here, but what happens is when you're planning for the year, you don't know all the variables that you need. Even when you're taking an existing program and you're taking it to a new area or a new community, you don't know what kind of challenges you may face. You may have estimated your cost in the beginning of the program, but you need to have some tolerance, some contingency to overcome these kind of uncertainties. So that's different from admin costs, which you may be able to estimate better.
Yeah. So are you saying corpus then?
No.
So
okay.
Yeah, that's what.
So this
that's
is
what I
a
was coming
tolerance
to.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
unplanned.
Right. Okay.
So that's what I was coming to. Contingency and reserves are often used as interchangeable terms, but they are not. Contingencies are short term. Reserves are long term. Reserves are what you will build as a corpus or an unrestricted reserve. Law itself allows, right? Income tax itself says you can have 15% reserves, provided you don't end up spending all your money. Like if you spend 100%, obviously you will not have reserves. But if you don't end up spending 85%, 15% you are allowed to have as reserves by law. Right? It's a different thing that you have tied up grants and you have to report 100% when it comes to CSR, etc. But when you look at unrestricted funding from other sources, crowdfunding from foundations, etc., it is very much possible for you to build reserves, right? So that's where contingency and reserves are different. Reserves you will only dip into when you have an emergency which is more than 6 months long. You do not have any like especially something like a COVID. It started as a contingency, right? We were all like, oh yes, 14 days and we'll all get rid of this. But eventually that 14 days turned into like, a few years. And some of us are still battling with it. There are so many organizations that shut down because they neither had contingencies or reserves. Sure.
See, when a corporate is supporting an organization, if you've already built in an admin cost and over to it you are also adding contingency requirement. So they're interested to support only admin cost to an extent of 5 to 7%. So they're not interested to provide contingency fund or management reserve fund. Then, I mean, does it come under CSR funding first of all? Because as a policy, they support a non-profit organization only to the extent of 7%, especially very big corporate.
Great. I think Shashank is going to talk a little more about that as to how do you classify funders and how do you approach them a little later. But I will quickly answer that you have to have a conversation where you are expressly giving them the opportunity to deny it. Right? Until you have that conversation, they will always feel, oh yeah, why do we need to fund you? You are coming with a 7%. Yeah. Right? But if you go to them with a 15% and they expressly disallow, they know that they have disallowed it. Having those conversations again and again will make them realize that they are actually denying you what you really need, right? And you also being able to showcase that, look, while your policy is 7%, as an organization, I need 25% to survive, right? So again, CSR shouldn't be the only way that you are fundraising. There has to be a good mix. So what somebody doesn't give, you will try and fundraise in other places, and we'll talk about that later. But I think just sort of closing the loop here, once you have all these components in place, you will have arrived at your true cost. First, you need to know, like today if I ask you, how many of you know your actual support costs right now? What percentage of your total budget is support costs? Very few organizations can very confidently say this is what it is. Right? While everybody does have a bracket saying, oh, we are between 15 to 20%, we are between 20 to 25%, but it's very difficult for anybody to say that, very concretely. Now, very quickly, we have done 3 workshops already. In Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, we had 61 participants across these organizations and 34 NGOs participate. There are approximately 90% organizations that came to our workshop said that they're very likely to adopt the guidelines that we're coming up with because they realized how they have been doing things differently and how it is possible to come to a common language that everybody can speak, have a systemized way of calculating a true cost, and having a clear way of communicating with the funders. This is something that will be coming soon. Um, it is under Creative Commons, so it is not something that you will have to pay for to get access to. It will be available free of cost. You can download it. You can read through it, understand it. Voluntarily see what you want to use from it. Leave out parts that you feel are not for your organization, and so on. We at the end of it, we will be having a QR code where you can leave your details so that we can get in touch with you, keep you involved and updated about future workshops that we have. I will hand over to Shashank to talk about what is the point, if I cannot raise funding for it.
No, and before that, I just wanted to, on the previous slide, talk about the fact that it's not just Aria and Bridgespan who are creating this. There's Center for Advancement of Philanthropy, there's PKF, Guru and Jana, Educate Girls.
Again, we have methods and sort of ratios defined that you can use. So remember the program cost ratio that we spoke about. Now, when you look at fundraising as a whole, it is almost always impossible to say how you can have fundraising cost absorbed by each program, in a time ratio or in some other ratio. So in those cases, you will use the program ratio that we spoke about earlier and distribute it between programs. Like, okay, my education program is 40% of my budget. So my fundraising effort would ideally also be 40% for that, right? And that is how you will absorb your support costs in a very simple manner here to be able to come at what the total cost of that program is. Similarly, like fundraising, you will have admin, you will have communication and outreach, and so on. Like some may have IT costs and HR costs, etc., that you club into administration as well. Once you have the stage 5, that is what you will calculate your contingencies on and your reserves on. What is contingency? Now, often these terms are used interchangeably, but we have very specifically defined that contingencies are for short term. These are ideally situations where, based on your program and based on your experience with or the life cycle of your organization, this ratio will also vary. Oftentimes people will say, what's a good percentage of contingency to have? There is no good percentage, or there is no thumb rule. It is based on what you need. If you are running an organization which is very new, right, and you have pilot programs, the chances are you need a higher contingency because what you don't know is what you don't know. If you are running, an organization or a program which has evolved over the time and is settled very well, the chances are the contingency requirement may be very, very low. This is something you can very easily see by looking at your past trends and saying, okay, we budgeted X, did we actually end up overspending, underspending? What's the cushion that we really need? Being transparent and truthful about this in your pitches, in your budgeting, will go a long way in helping the donor understand. The first year they may say, oh, no, you don't want contingency, or we cannot fund contingency. But consistently, if you keep asking for it and keep showing them that, look, last year this is what happened, and hence we are asking for this, the chances that you'll be able to raise for that keep on increasing. Try this with your existing funders first before you can try it with new funders, because there the relationship takes time to build. The trust will take more time to build. People who trust you will fund contingency and reserves faster, right? Because they already know how you function, how efficient you are. If you are saying something, you are saying it because you have the experience. We have that trust going on between each other. Sorry,
been arrived at from any kind of scientific calculation. Most of the funders said we kept a limit. Most of the NGOs said, yeah, this works. Our partners have told us, yes, this is the right limit, it works. So there hasn't been any resistance from the NGOs on that kind of limit setting. If a funder tomorrow tells you be 5% as written in the law by CSR, most of the NGOs will accept. We have encountered NGOs who have won high net worth individual in US funding all their overheads, and their pitch to funder is, we are highly effective because we are a zero overhead organization for you. When did overhead become a measure of effectiveness? Who created that kind of communication? That's something that we need to be very clear about. We need to dispel this myth that if I have low overheads, if I have low support costs, if I'm not asking for organizational development, I am more effective, because I'm not. I'm actually short term. I'm actually not thinking in terms of true service to the community, because I'm not trying to understand that some of the challenges that I am working on will probably take 10 years, 15 years to go away. All I'm thinking about right now is, how will my organization continue to function with all good intentions? But this is what I am communicating as an NGO. So there is this important need for NGOs to dispel this notion of low overheads, low indirect cost means effectiveness. There's a need for NGOs to dispel this myth of saying we don't need anything else, being more vulnerable, being more open about it, saying we really need to strengthen our MEL system. We really need to strengthen our data capture system. We need to go to the funders with a partnership mindset of saying, if we want to serve the community better, we need these things to be in place. Till we do that, till we keep on going to a funder asking, what's your overhead limit, creating a budget retrospectively and saying, okay, this fits your policies, fund me now, this problem will persist. But coming to program proponents, that's the problem. The third are organization builders. There's a subset of funders in the ecosystem who realize that institutions, that the NGOs are, they are critical for the problems to be really solved. So they're voluntarily by themselves sometimes asking NGOs, what do you need? What else can be done? Giving more flexibility, giving unrestricted funding. I can name organizations like Rohini Nilekani Philanthropy, Rain Matter Foundation, Ford Foundation, who are taking that approach of saying, we can't solve these problems in a year or two. We need to have strong institutions, people who are closer to the ground, closer to the community, who are in a position to solve these over time. What was very interesting for us was a vast majority actually fell in what we are calling adaptive funders. These funders said that while they had policies, they had the flexibility to move away from those policies. They did not have a very strict limit in terms of what was the core cost coverage that they were giving. On a case-by-case basis, they were also willing to invest in organizational development of NGOs. It depended on how well the NGO's relationship with that funder was, how strong that was, how well did the funder understood the need for that organizational development. So people who were communicating it well, people who were investing in relationship building, they were being supported, but there was no uniform policy that these funders were putting out to say, yes, we will give X percentage for organizational development, or we have a flexibility on our indirect cost. So there is this element of funders have more flexibility, but they want some level of transparency and accountability so that they, if it is required, they are answerable to other stakeholders and they are able to provide that answer. So when you're trying to raise, I think we should have more time. We started at 9:15. Oh, guys, sorry. So this is something that we have learned, that funders have more flexibility. If you have a strong rationale, they may be willing to budge. The way to go about it is to tailor your pitch to each of your funder archetypes. If you have a funder who's saying 7% indirect cost, understand why 7%. Why is it uniform? How is it okay to have a 7%? Let's say for an NGO which is working in one geography versus an NGO which is working in 15 geographies, because the core cost, the administrative cost may be higher as your number of locations increase. You need more management supervision, more. So there will be those kind of conversations to be had. Showcase examples of other funders who may be of similar type, similar size, similar demography. If you're talking to a CSR funder, show example of another CSR funder. Show that it is possible to deviate from these kind of things. Dispel notions like law says 5%. No law says 5% indirect cost coverage. There's a clarification from the ministry which says that it is only applicable to the internal cost of the CSR function. So whatever it is, having a conversation which is not emotional, don't have a conversation like I'm talking right now. Have a more rational, cool, composed conversation, and justify why this cost needs to change. Initially focus on changing their core cost coverage. Initially focus on OD needs which may be very directly related to program. When it comes to organizational builders, there you need to actually cultivate that kind of partnership approach, share with them, seek their input, seek their guidance, make them your advisors so that they also feel as invested in your success as you would want them to be. And once they are invested in your success, they would proactively say, okay, what do you need? How can you do this better? What kind of funding will be better? Again, for the adaptive funders as well, this is where having a very structured OD plan, having the true cost computation the way Ravi talked about, is definitely useful. One thing that we would say is, as Ravi mentioned, it's easier, and easier is within quotes, it's easier to raise funding from your existing funders who know the impact that you're creating, funders who know you as people, who have been with you in that journey. So in case you don't have long-term funders, that should be first priority for you. Convert some of your funders into long-term funders, repeated funding, getting them more involved, get them more immersed in the program through field visits, get them more involved in terms of sharing not just your positives but also what may have not worked, seeking their inputs on how things can be better, incorporating some of those inputs, make them feel invested in you is something that we would definitely suggest. When I said easier is in quotes, it is a long and hard journey. It's not that you have created these computation guidelines, you have an OD plan, you'll go to the funder and the funder will say, ye re paise. So it's not going to happen, and we have had conversations with NGOs who have been successful. It may be a long and arduous journey. It may be journey of keeping at it despite failures. People who are fundraisers would know, like, you have to accept the failure is going to be a part of your journey. You have to knock on more doors than will actually open. And that will be true here. But as things start to change, the change for other funders will get accelerated. What we learned was, like, there's one NGO that Aria is profiling in the guidelines. They moved from going with the funders' indirect cost percentages to communicating what their indirect cost needs were, to after 2 or 3 years saying there's an OD component in our budget. We need this for capacity building. To now actually saying organizational development, indirect cost coverage is all standardized. Now we need money to build reserves as well. So over a period of time, over 6-year journey, they have been able to convert their funders from saying, I have a 10% limit, to covering their actual indirect cost, to investing in the organization, to now getting into a conversation on reserves. So it's doable. There are examples of NGOs who have been able to do it. It's just that you need to be persistent about it. And yeah, I have taken all the time.
The government has identified some districts. What is this? Aspirational districts. Thank you. So my question to you is how, because The problem is, as an NGO, when we work, we want to make a change. And the change is not possible in 1 year sometimes. And now due to the change in the CSR policies, now they're saying, okay, we would not like to fund over here, but we would like to fund in either in an aspirational district where we are not there, or in their own factory location. So that's a huge challenge now. And I just wanted to understand, I mean, because we are definitely facing this problem, and I mean, I am representing in fundraising only. So I am also in senior management, but definitely part of fundraising. So definitely this is thing which I am facing it. I felt, yeah, how to deal with this, because this is, it's not only me, I believe everybody is going to face if they are not facing now. So this is a big challenge, because our motto as an NGO is to make an impact.
Yeah.
But now with the government thing coming up and saying that, oh no, you have to do something like this in your factory locations, or you move to aspirational districts, and to shift the entire work which we have been doing it for 10 years immediately, I don't think that's going to be very, very feasible. So how to convince those donors to say that no, that's important, please continue there.
Yeah. So I don't think it's binding right now in the CSR law to only work in factory locations or aspirational districts. If you have PSU CSR, that nudge will be stronger from the government. Private CSR doesn't have any compulsion. There's a definite element of CSR organization saying it's better for me to work closer to my factory location. But there are other ways in which you can do it. You can, for example, use the multi-poverty index if you are working in a location where multi-poverty index is pretty high. Then you can say, yes, these may not be classified as aspirational districts, but there are certain blocks in these districts which are as poor as aspirational districts. So one argument that you can make is from the need side itself. If your funders are sort of very insistent that they will only fund in certain locations, the point that Ravi was making, a diversification of funders becomes important. So it becomes important for you to see if you are getting money from foundations, if you're getting from ultra high net worth individuals, high net worth individuals, retail funders, global foundations. See if you can create a good mix of funders so that you can cover.
I just say that very quickly. We have time. I've been warned that we have time for only 2 or 3 more questions. Shashank and I can field questions after the masterclass as well. Can I request that the next slide be on this? The QR code that we have, you can leave your details there. We will get in touch with you, send you the PPT, send you, the details about the guidelines and the next few workshops that are happening.
We are planning to conduct workshops across cities, so South India would definitely be covered. We haven't yet finalized the cities, but it may be Bangalore, it may be Hyderabad, it may be Chennai. We don't know.
Leave your registration here. We will get in touch with you.
Maybe put your finance and fundraising team in a room and say we'll not open the door till each one of you speaks the other's language. Yeah. No, but that's also a problem. If you will, that's also a problem in the for-profit world. The sales team doesn't understand finance either. Sorry, you had a bit.
Yes, my name is Dhimant. I am from Dhriti Communications. My question is two-part. Maybe each of you can take 30 seconds to answer. One is, given that we have this burden of utilization certificate,
Yes.
how do you get in the contingency and corpus? And if we don't spend that money and the utilization certificate is not given, the money by law goes back into CSR fund. That's
so again, reserves are something that you cannot raise from CSR, right? The
Okay.
law is very clear about it. CSR money needs to be utilized, but contingency is something that you can keep in the budget. If you don't have, it's similar to you estimated some variability that variability did not occur, so that contingency is unspent. Now you can either, let's say, look at the last quarter of your program and say, okay, this is money unspent, we don't estimate that it will get spent, so can we increase the scope of our program and use it?
And just one part is that,
So sorry, a very important thing that you brought out is utilization conversations should happen midway as well.
Sure. So the second part of it is that while it's all good to say that we want 15% admin, I mean I teach fundraising a little bit, so in my classes I say go and ask 25% if your program is good. But the problem is for 25,000 funders there are more than 1 million askers. So if I'm doing it at 25%, somebody is doing it at 5%, somebody is doing it at 0%. How do we as a community get together? I mean, it's difficult given the competition, given the doors that we have to knock anyways.
So again, it's the same thing. मतलब Dove साबुन भी बिकता है, Lux साबुन भी बिकता है, Lifebuoy भी बिकता है. You need to find who's the right funder for you. There may be funders who are fine with saying मैंने इतने schools की wall paint कर दी, and all I need is number of schools in which I have improved infrastructure by painting the walls. If you are that kind of funder, then probably you will not care about other things. But there will be other funders who will be saying wall paint करने से क्या होता है? मतलब there would be another layer of funders who will understand the problem and say, if there are no clean toilets for the girl child, a girl will not even enroll in the school or will not attend the school. And they will say, don't paint the wall, build toilets. There will be another who will say, acha, enrollment is no longer a problem, attrition is no longer a problem, actual learning levels is a problem, so let's solve for that. So there's also this point of who do you reach out to and how do you celebrate those funders who are making meaningful impact. So even from your perspective, let's say if you're putting out a report and if you celebrate some of those funders who are more meaningful, someone who was more thoughtful, give those mentions, give those shout outs to them, that will create that competition even in funders. ना मतलब आपको लगता है कि funders में competition नहीं है, बहुत competition है. नहीं quantification में नहीं होगा, पर ego में ज़्यादा है. That's a very wrong mindset. If you were in a for-profit company and if you were making all your sales at an operating loss, you would be fired. Like, we need to learn certain things from what? No, or you need to have like those deep pockets from VCs to continue. But now Zomato is making operating profit now. Yeah, but they are a monopoly. Yeah.